Some of the spectators who showed up were as interesting as the contenders. Black Pearl came sailing into Newport for the occasion straight out of the 1800s. Storm Vogel arrived from Amsterdam. She had spent the whole year afloat, entering every ocean race in the world except this one. Drumbeat came over from England. C. Raymond Hunt was the designer of Drumbeat, and her owner, Max Aiken, has a Sinclair dinosaur perched on the boom for a mascot.
And David Boyd was back in Newport. David designed Scepter, the British Challenger that got nothing but defeat in 1958. Now he has 2 more 12s on the drawing boards and was anxious to see how they'd compare with the new boats, Nefertiti and Gretel. And then everybody in Newport turned out as Gretel, who brought about the whole 1962 challenge, came to town. Excitement in the air, but miserable weather blowing hard. They started towing her up from Stamford, Connecticut at about 1 o'clock in the morning, and she didn't arrive in Newport until 5 the next afternoon.
As Gretel rounded the bend into Newport Harbor, the entire Newport fleet turned out to greet her. Fireboats blew their whistles and sprayed their hoses into the air. Gretel was a formidable challenger, and a popular one, with an American-style parade 3 blocks long to prove it. Sir Frank Packer, head of the syndicate which built the Challenger, rode with the mayor of Newport. Jock Sturrock, who was to be Gretel's skipper, followed in the next car, leading the crew. And the Australian flag was carried down the street by an Australian-style cowboy. The U.S. Marines came in from the Newport Naval Base and escorted Gretel's crew to City Hall. There they were met by Commodore Vanderbilt, one of the greats, who won America's Cup 3 times in the days of the J-boats. And there, Sir Frank was given the keys to the city.
But the keys to the city were about the only things we intended Sir Frank to get. We planned to keep the cup bolted down right here.
But who would meet the Australian challenge? There was a scrimmage set of match races, the observation trials. And then during the July cruise, the 12s first raced as a group. This cruise, sponsored annually by the New York Yacht Club, was actually a series of 8 races in the Narragansett and Buzzard Bay areas. More than 85 racing yachts joined the competition. And among the very closest observers were the Australian challengers, who raced along in Vim, the American 12-meter they'd chartered to trial race with Gretel.
Vim was the very same boat Bus Mosbacher raced so brilliantly in 1958 against Columbia. Now we'd see how the Australians would perform with her. They weren't about to let us see what Gretel herself would do. I was on Easterner then. Rounding the mark in the group race off Block Island, we were last, but very quickly caught Nefertiti, and then Weatherly. But then, Columbia caught up and got away from us. This was something new for Columbia, normally a placid runner, not very spectacular on the downwind legs. The rules called for small cruising club spinnakers in this race, and when Weatherly came down and got our wind, our spinnaker stopped drawing. Then she went by us. There was no apparent weakness in the way Weatherly was acting this year.
On the 6th leg of the cruise, just off Hadley's Harbor, all 4 of the contenders, plus the Australians and Vim, roared up to the line on a beam reach in one of the prettiest starts of the summer. Weatherly, Easterner, Nefertiti, Vim, Columbia. One spinnaker out. That's Nefertiti's. And then they all start to come out. 4. And then all 5, with Weatherly concealed. Columbia, in the white spinnaker, breaks out into the lead. Nefertiti right behind her. Dousing spinnakers, they go down and turn the mark. Columbia first.
Easterner was getting backwinded, and she tacked away while the other 3 went off on the starboard tack. This proved very successful, almost, because as Easterner went back on the starboard tack, she was able to make the finish line, while the rest of the fleet overstood it. She almost won the race, but not quite, because Nefertiti is a very fast-reaching boat, and when they discovered that they were overlaying the mark, they just started reaching off and came roaring right on up. Neffy finally caught Eastern in the last mile and won by about 3 boat lengths.
Improving crew performance as a team required constant practice. To reduce time and motion to the bare effective minimum meant welding together every single motion of every man on board. Gears and winches and sail changes were worked on daily. The crews changed jibs by going through what is called an interim jib. This involves hauling up a new jib on the outside of the one already in place, and then breaking it out. When that is in place, the inside jib is taken off the forestay. Then they hoist another jib, newly hanked, onto the forestay and break it out. That adds up to the jib they want. In the course of the summer, most crews work this procedure down to between 3.5 and 4.5 minutes.
And as we kept polishing our tactics, we decided on Easterner that one boat can have only one skipper. As designer of the boat, Ray Hunt logically took over the job. And when I went ashore at Marion, a very friendly guy by the name of Bus Mosbacher asked me to join Weatherly. It took me just 2.5 seconds to say yes. So I became part of Weatherly's bench and advisor to Bus on tactics and sail setting. Since Bus and I had grown up together, and my wife had told me she was rooting for Weatherly no matter what boat I raced on, it was good to be aboard.
Weatherly turned out to be a good boat to be associated with. In the July series of observation match races, Weatherly had surprised observers by losing only 4 of her 11 trials. She emerged from the New York Yacht Club cruise as successful defender of the Queen's Cup. As the boats began their August series of final elimination races, Weatherly suddenly became a favorite, running very close to Nefertiti. Only love and devotion and the finest of crews had brought Weatherly to this position. She had to fight to stay there. Nefertiti was still the glamour boat, the boat most watched. And Gretel, lying in wait for the American defender, was almost a complete mystery. Actually, the 12s were racing for about 2 seconds per mile between the best boat and the worst boat. In other words, about 1/4% in total speed around a normal 26-mile course. For that reason, the outcome was still anybody's guess. Any number of predictions were floating around at that point. Everyone had a favorite contender. Contenders that ranged from a notorious hard-luck boat that had been greatly modified to a daring new one that might change design history for the 12s. Contenders that included 2 steady winners with honorable racing histories. But what was to count most in the end was the human factor. As the final eliminations began, the boats themselves were so closely matched in development and equipment that any one might beat any other any time out. Only one would be trusted to protect the 111-year monopoly held by America in the world's most majestic racing classic.
Right, John. And we were all out to make sure it was Weatherly.